The so-called Epstein files relating to convicted and now deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, have exploded onto the headlines with millions of files dumped and all sorts of accusations and implications on a who's who of the rich and powerful across the world. But what does this mean for us in the world? Yes, in the United States in particular, but in other parts of the world as well. And what changes, if anything, from the release of, well, at least the latest release from the Epstein files? Joining me on the program now, an expert in geopolitics from the University of Otago, Professor Robert Patman. Robert, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Kia ora, Andrew. It's good to be with you.
Can you start with an overview of what has been released and what is actually happening here in this moment in time?
Well, what's been released is the recent release of about 3 million documents pertaining to the investigation relating to Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, in what appears to be some sort of sex trafficking network.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Mr. Epstein was certainly guilty of sexual abuse within the United States. The evidence is not quite there yet to say that he was operating some sort of global network, but there is a deep suspicion he was. And of course, 25 co-conspirators have not been identified other than the two, Epstein and Maxwell. So there's a lot to come. There was 3 million documents, and I believe more than 2,000 videos. And I think it will take diligent reporters quite a bit of time to sift through this enormous amount of material. What we've had so far are some snapshot impressions.
Yeah.
And already, as you indicated in your lead, some pretty prominent names. Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador to the United States, has been forced to resign.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, the release of these documents, which is, as I said, relatively recent, has already set up a political earthquake in the UK. Keir Starmer's not only lost Mandelson, he's lost his chief of staff,
mm-hmm.
Morgan McSweeney, very important position for a prime minister. And also, I think it's having reverberations in the royal family with more controversial images of Andrew I think Mountbatten Windsor now, not Prince Andrew.
Yeah, and there's lots of material there, but one of the things that surprises many people, they're thinking, gosh, with this much material, then we should have a list of people that we want to arrest or at least investigate. Some awful things have happened to innocent victims. We want to see justice here, and yet one of the statements from, I think, FBI director said, well, there's lots of information, but none of it will lead to a conviction. Almost, hey, here's 3 million documents, but nothing to see here. There's a huge contradiction there.
That's been the FBI line under Kash Patel, who's a political appointment by Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump's name appears 38,000 times, according to reports from Washington in the recent document release.
Yeah.
He clearly is very sensitive about this issue. He was a close personal friend of Jeffrey Epstein for around 15 years. Apparently they fell out around 2004.
Mm-hmm.
But for much of the 90s and the early 2000s, they were almost inseparable. And so there's been questions raised about how detached the president is from this whole process. And of course, I think what we're seeing here, I hesitate to make historical analogies, Andrew, because they're always, your viewers and listeners will say, oh, but there was a big difference between the episode I'm going to cite, but it does have parallels, slight parallels, with Watergate, where there was almost blanket denials at the beginning.
Yep.
Then there was partial denials until the circumstances over 2 years between 1972 1974 unfolded in a way which then Richard Nixon, the President of the United States, was forced to resign. I would hesitate to predict the trajectory of where we're going with all this information that's being released. I do think the United States is facing a political upheaval. Many Americans across the political divide, and this is important, some of the progress that's been made, and it's been done in the face of defiance by the Trump administration.
Yep.
I mean, the Trump administration hasn't reached this point willingly. It's come under a lot of pressure. And the pressure has been orchestrated, amongst others, by a bipartisan duo of Thomas Massie from the Republican Party and Rohana from the Democratic Party. These two individuals have come together to wield considerable pressure. And the Department of Justice said the matter is now closed. They can declare that, but that doesn't mean it is over, because one of the dynamics that's driving this has indeed split MAGA, Make America Great Again movement, has been the fact that the victims are courageously coming forward and reliving that trauma all over again. And there is a lot of them. And I think there's a number of people in Congress now responding to the victims and demanding accountability for what appears to be a highly organized network.
Now, I just want to jump into this because I'm glad you brought up the Watergate analogy. And yes, of course, there are differences, as there always will be. But I think one of the key ones is rather than having two courageous reporters from the Washington Post, I understand, well played by Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman in the film.
Woodward. Carl Bernstein.
Yeah, exactly. So rather than them doing the investigating, the people doing the investigating and making decisions about what will be released, what won't be, what will be redacted, what won't be. As you mentioned, these are political appointments who are making this. And in one case, it's somebody who was a former defense attorney for Donald Trump in the Stormy Daniels trial, that these aren't necessarily neutral journalists seeking the truth. They are individuals who are sworn to protect their president.
Yes. One of the things we have to take into account, which sounds quite strange to New Zealand ears and eyes, is the Department of Justice is quite a politicized organization. And that is to say, the president appoints the senior officials to that department. And this president has made it very clear that he wants loyalty.
Yeah.
And so Kash Patel, who had very little background, headed in law enforcement, became head of the FBI, mainly because these individuals were perceived as being very loyal to the president. But I do think there's I think there's an unpredictability about this unfolding story. What has transpired is truly shocking.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that many of the victims of these crimes, which implicate Epstein and Maxwell, the victims were young children.
Yes.
Who were subject to terrible sexual abuse. And I think many people, again, trying to depoliticize this across the political aisle, feel there is a fundamental distinction between right and wrong, and that shouldn't be politicized. And that's where Thomas Massie is. He's departed from his colleagues in the Republican Party, many of whom remain loyal to the president. But I do think the pressure is going to mount, because what is striking many Americans as curious about the Epstein files fallout so far is that the whole thing was orchestrated from the United States, and we know at the center of that orchestration was Epstein and Maxwell. But the fallout seems to be occurring in countries like Britain and Norway.
Yes.
And I think it's only a matter of time before the pressure intensifies for much greater accountability. It does appear to be the case from these 3 million documents released, and remember, there's another 3 million yet to be released, that there were many more individuals involved other than Epstein and Maxwell. And I think many Americans, this is a society where inequality has actually grown. quite significantly in the last 60 years. I think many Americans perceive there's one law for the rich and powerful,
Yeah.
another law for those who are not so fortunate.
I want to
And I
get,
think
yeah.
this crisis is bringing to a head that sense of frustration. So I think the demands for greater accountability will intensify.
I want to get into the details of this, actually, because, I mean, it does sound like a conspiracy, doesn't it? That there's a cabal of global pedophile elites. But that's actually an accurate description of what we're seeing in the Epstein files. But the world has changed a lot since Watergate. And honestly, some people are saying, hey, back in the day, people's political careers ended, people ended up in prison. But the world has changed to such an extent that being immoral or even dishonest doesn't even seem to be politically problematic in the United States anymore.
Well, I think you've identified something which has motivated both Massey and Hannah, the two politicians leading the fight for the victims. They say this behavior must not be normalized.
Yeah.
And those who've engaged in this behavior must be held to account. Those people who have abused and even raped children, they must not be allowed to get away with it.
Yeah. And
so I think you're quite right. There's been a drift away in terms of public standards. Maybe it's always been that way covertly, but I think there is a sense we live in this interconnected world, Andrew, where we know more and more. We have lots and lots of information. I think, in a sense, people will demand much greater accountability, and that's why I hesitate to make any predictions about where this is going. I'm so sure that Mr. Trump hopes that the release of the documents will basically shut down the conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think that will happen, simply because many of the victims said if there's not greater accountability, they will start publicly naming the individuals.
This is, I think, what happens when this was what happens in particular people's ethics and morality, when they are so supremely powerful that they feel like they are, and they feel like they aren't going to get caught, that in some ways their money and influence inoculates them against their own depravity. This has been the sort of cocooned world that certain people have been able to live in, and now that we're pulling back the curtain on this depravity, I mean, it's certainly shocking. People are calling for justice. What that looks like, we won't know, but certainly likely to have an impact on the midterms.
Yes, indeed. And I think it's going to have political reverberations. The midterms, of course, what we have to say here is that in the last year or so, the United States has experienced a bit of a drift towards autocracy.
Yeah.
And the president of the United States, and this is not just a view held on the left or the middle or the right, seems to be somewhat cavalier about the constraints of law and also the Constitution. So many Americans at the moment are quite fearful. They are concerned, put it that way, that the midterms may not be the sort of fair and free elections they want. We wait and see on that. People like Steve Bannon, who's a big Trump supporter, has said that the ICE enforcement people will be manning every single election poll.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then you can see an potentially explosive situation. But let's hope that America sticks with its traditions and goes ahead with the midterms in a reasonably fair and free manner.
Steve Bannon, of course, is
it
also
will figure prominently.
Steve Bannon also, of course, features heavily in the Epstein files, as do significant presidents, past presidents, philanthropists, billionaires from various parts of the planet. And I suppose the erosion of trust that this creates in not just individuals, but in the system itself, huge damage that is done. Yes, of course, not forgetting the victims who have been treated so horrifically, but huge damage to trust in the system, to trust in democracy.
Yes, but one thing I think we must establish that, Andrew, is that just because a person is mentioned in the Epstein files,
Yeah.
we shouldn't impugn or assume that they're guilty of any of the darker offences that are being considered.
Mm.
Um, he was a Epstein was in many respects a remarkable person,
Yeah.
who established. He was a relentless networker,
Hmm.
but it wasn't a sort of a person who was just going about it in a relaxed fashion and having a good time.
Yeah.
There seems to be a very methodical targeting of highly positioned people in all fields.
Yeah.
He established himself as a major donor for Harvard University, and of course, one of the early casualties of the Epstein files, even before this recent dump, was Larry Summers, who
Yeah.
had to stand down from Harvard University, a very distinguished academic. So he even spoke to people like Noam Chomsky, who was at the other end of the ideological spectrum.
Yeah.
So this is not but Epstein cultivated people in many different fields and across a wide spectrum, a wide political spectrum. So
I want to touch on that actually because this seems purposeful. This seems
yes,
systematic. This seems like let's see if we can gather as broad a net of possible as of rich, powerful influencers, and let's see if we can gather information on them that would be detrimental to their well-being, setting up basically a blackmail network. Some people have commentated that Epstein may have been the figurehead, but that this network was more than one man could achieve. That there were other forces and influences that were supporting him, that were backing him, that were benefiting from the information and the influence that he was gathering.
yes, and I think that's one of the inferences of the recent release of documents is that there's many other people involved, more people involved in this network that Epstein and Maxwell seem to be at the center of.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that it was so systematic in the sense that Maxwell, all his properties had many cameras within them,
Yeah.
even in the bathrooms. And so this wasn't a casual playboy just enjoying his money and spreading a bit of fun out amongst friends.
Mm.
This was someone who was, and this has led to a second point. Not only was there a degree of purpose and planning about what he was doing, but there's been speculation that he had close relations with a number of governments, and that's raised speculation about his intelligence links with both the Russian government. Initially, there was a big focus on the Russian government.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, the focus has looked at the relationship between Epstein and Mossad, the Israeli intelligence. So, yeah, again, this is murky.
Yeah.
It's speculation. We don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
It does sort of time with the point that this was not a sort of casual socializing that was going on from a very rich individual.
Is it possible we'll never know exactly what Epstein's purpose in all of this was, what his end game was, what he was hoping to achieve? As you say, more than just a depraved individual using his money to buy influence. But is it possible that we'll never really know who Jeffrey Epstein was and what he was trying to achieve?
It's possible we won't know, but it may take a long time.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Kennedy assassination of 1960, November 63, for a long time, that act was attributed to one individual,
Yep.
Harvey Lee Oswald. But with the passage of time and the accumulation of evidence, there has been, and particularly with the release of more JFK documents last year,
Mm-hmm.
there's been a growing skepticism that one person could have pulled that off on their own. We may see a similar evolution in this case. I think what's different about the Epstein case, though, and why I'm slightly more optimistic we'll know sooner rather than later,
Yeah.
is because of the pressure of the many victims, maybe as many as 1,000 people, some of whom, Andrew, haven't come forward, but they may come forward and they may have a lot of information as they see this case opening up. Because after all, for many people, the incentives for coming forward if the government doesn't take the whole issue seriously, are not great, because you would relive the trauma, you'd incur a lot of public scrutiny. But if this case really opens up and some individuals start being hauled in for these crimes, then you can see other people coming forward, and you then get momentum. So I think the human aspect of this, where so many people have been the subject of appalling sexual abuse, could be the dynamic that opens this up perhaps quite rapidly.
And hey, despicable actions, but bringing that darkness into the light, so that the truth may be discerned and justice can be done. This is certainly what we hope for and pray will be the outcome of this. But Robert, as you say, it's complicated and difficult to predict exactly how things will unfold. Very much appreciate your wisdom and insight as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.